The Pilgrimage of the Heart podcast is brought to you by PYO.yoga, an online studio for all your yoga needs, including videos in Spanish and Russian. This podcast is also brought to you by Pilgrimage of the Heart Yoga, located in San Diego and serving over 1,000 yogis a week.
Welcome to Pilgrimage of the Heart interviews. Join us as we explore fascinating people and ideas in the world of yoga. Hi, this is Sujantra with Pilgrimage Yoga Online, and welcome to our podcast interviews. Our guest today is Alana Kaivalya, who we are speaking to in New York. Alana believes that yoga is for everyone, and she has developed the Kaivalya Yoga method, which we're going to hear about, which is a fresh take on yoga that emphasizes the individual path of the modern person while honoring the time-tested tradition of yoga. Alana has been teaching students since 2001 and teachers since 2003, and she has traveled, written, studied, and led teacher trainings around the world. She holds a PhD in mythological studies with an emphasis on depth psychology, and she has written 2 books, Myth of the Asanas, and the second book, which I just finished reading, entitled Sacred Sound, Discovering the Myth and Meaning Behind Mantra and Kirtan. Alana has also taught at Yoga Journal conferences, Omega Institute, all of the great retreat centers, and writes for Huffington Post, Elephant Journal, and Well and Good. So thank you very much for joining us, Alana.
Oh, it's my great pleasure for being here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
And my first question to you is, you've done so much with yoga and in sharing and spreading yoga, but going back in your own life, what was it that brought you to the practice of yoga?
I originally found yoga as a college student. I was struggling with a thyroid disorder called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and I had been diagnosed pretty young, which was very unusual for the condition. Nobody really knew what to do for me. And I had started working out at the gym, and it just wasn't working out. I was actually gaining weight and feeling more miserable because of the thyroid condition. But one of my friends had suggested yoga. I resisted for quite a while because I was majoring in physics and astronomy. And the idea of doing something that was so esoteric and so what seemed to me beyond the realm of science was very outlandish. So it took a year before I finally relented and tried my first yoga class. But it was really even in that first class that I felt something different. And of course, it was unquantifiable and I couldn't really explain it, but I could feel it and it was real. So I was pretty much hooked from that first class, and I just really dove in head first into yoga and the practices. And at that same time, I was actually fulfilling one of my college course requirements with a class on the religions of South Asia, which included Hinduism and Buddhism. So at the same time I had started my yoga practice, I was learning the corresponding mythologies behind the practice. So it brought it to life for me in a really potent and powerful way. And I think in a way that gave it more richness right off the bat and gave me a lot of different things within yoga to hold on to and look into more, which, I'm a huge fan of research and a huge fan of learning and a huge fan of studying. So right off the bat, I fell in love with yoga, and it was something that was beyond my my previous life experience up to that point, and just really outside of my comfort zone. And I think that that's part of why I enjoyed it so much and have stuck with it ever since.
And here I noticed in your biography that you, of course, obviously have gone on to teach teachers and to teach other people yoga. So here at our yoga studio in San Diego, we have hundreds of people who come each week to practice yoga. We also have teacher trainings. And so that transition from enjoying yoga to wanting to teach it, what for you, what occurred there that inspired you to want to teach and share the experience with others?
Well, emergency occurred, actually. It was never honestly my intention. I really enjoyed practicing yoga, but I graduated college right around September 11th. And there were just no jobs. And no jobs also meant for me that I couldn't afford to take my yoga classes anymore. So it was really out of necessity. I had figured out that if I taught yoga at a studio, I would be allowed to go in and take classes for free. My first jobs were actually as a Montessori school teacher. I ran the after-school program starting at age 15 at the Montessori school down the street. And I figured very naively, being so young, that, if I could teach kids, I can teach anybody. Little did I know how complex and intricate yoga actually was, but I honestly just wanted to keep taking classes. So I did a yoga teaching certification and started to teach. And I loved the fact that teaching yoga left a lot of my hours open to still go on job interviews. But a year and a half later, I was still jobless. So I ended up continuing my yoga education. And at that time, I was living in Colorado. That's where I was born and raised. So in Colorado, there wasn't, back in that time period, there wasn't the rich abundance of yoga as there is today. It was still really a burgeoning practice. So I ended up having a lot of education in yoga that people really needed. And so I was actually asked by a yoga studio in Denver called Core Power Yoga to help them with their teacher training.
Oh, nice. Yeah, Core Power.
So, yeah, it kind of fell in my lap. I didn't really... I sort of refer to myself as the reluctant yogi. There wasn't a point in time where I was like, yes, I'm going to do this. It just seemed to be the next thing to do to keep up with my yoga practice. And then, of course, 15 years later, here I am, and I'm still in love with it and still pursuing it and still finding even more richness from the practice.
Sounds like the universe really wanted you to be a yoga teacher.
Yeah, and it really wouldn't let me quit either.
Right. And so now,
when I first moved to New York, I tried, but it didn't work out.
Yeah, and now these 15 years later, what? So again, to the people out there that are getting into yoga and enjoying it and going deeper, what does your own practice look like? We're going to talk about your teachings in a minute, but on a personal level, what's your yoga practice?
I mainly these days stick with meditation, mantra, ritual, and study, honestly. I have had some physical problems as a result of overstretching and overbending in asana. Uh-huh. I, like many people, dedicated myself to a very vigorous daily asana practice for many years, thinking that doing it every day and practicing every day and pushing further and stretching more was the thing, and really told that by many of my teachers. As a result, I have had a lot of hypermobility issues that are quite painful, actually. So I've had to back off of the asana practice quite a bit, which, is a blessing and a curse as I heal my own body from that, and have been able to turn to explore different things within my practice. I mean, really, I've always loved the asana, but it was the deeper practices, even initially, that intrigued me. Right from that first course of religions in South Asia, learning about Ganesh and the stories of Lakshmi and Saraswati, I just had never heard anything like that before. So that's really what made me fall in love with the practice, and it's been a wonderful opportunity to continue that as a practice and really build that out further.
And then getting into your unique Kaivalya yoga method, which you've developed, what because there's so many styles of yoga out there, and people hear about Iyengar and power yoga and meditation and all these different elements. How would you describe the essence of your Kaivalya method? And maybe you could tell us what the word Kaivalya means. Maybe we could start with that.
Yeah, sure. The word Kaivalya is actually, most people will have potentially heard of it if they've been through yoga teacher training and have studied the Yoga Sutras. It's the title of the 4th chapter of the Yoga Sutra, and the word Kaivalya means ultimate freedom. It's a word that's synonymous with enlightenment through a path of real individualism. And it was a word that I had heard very early on in my studies that piqued my interest, and there was just something about the word that really clicked inside me, and I really loved it. So, I obviously changed my last name to that a long time ago, and I,
nice.
Once again, didn't realize, I didn't really realize what I was doing when I did it at the time. I think it was my young naivete. I thought the word sounded cool, and I had no idea what I was setting myself up for by choosing that as a surname. But, it's grown on me, and I really love it. So that's what the word Kaivalya means. And basically, over the years of my studies, I spent a lot of time, obviously, practicing and studying yoga as it has come to the West. And there was a point in my own practice and study where I really found myself kind of banging my head against the wall and not really feeling that blissful oneness that everyone was saying that was supposed to happen with the daily practice, the consistent meditation, the constant study, I just felt like I was getting better at looking like I was happy, whereas I was still really in pain inside. So it was around 2007 or so that I started to, someone alerted me to the power of the unconscious, and the power of psychology and the power of working with the unconscious to delve deeply and figure out what's really going on inside you in order to lift it up and out. It turns out that principle and that call does not really happen within the yoga practice. And so it is quite entirely missing from yoga, and it's then no wonder that so many of us don't really feel the benefits because we're trying to change primarily the conscious mind by overlooking or forcing out or repressing the unconscious by not addressing it at all. Change can't happen that way. And that was really frustrating to me. And when I learned that this was a really big missing piece in yoga, I decided that this was something that I was going to have to fill in and figure out really intelligently how to fill it in. So the Kaivalya Yoga method is essentially what I believe to be a much more holistic practice, a practice that addresses the Western person, the Western mind, the Western practitioner who's very focused on the individual and who is looking to transform. So the things that I bring into the practice that help to round it out and make it a more transformational practice for that Western person is depth psychology, working with the unconscious, ritual, mythology, and of course meditation to give the person a path to what's called personal mythology. Many of us in this day and age as Westerners have turned away from our original religion or mythological belief system, but it doesn't mean that we don't still need something like that. And a lot of us turn toward yoga in hopes that it will provide that structure for us, but right now, as it is, yoga doesn't. So I'm hoping to give people the tools and the means to be able to provide that for themselves.
And your book, Sacred Sound, which I just finished reading, is full of a lot of those wonderful stories and the explanation of the mythology behind so many of these characters.
Yeah, exactly. Mantra, people toss around the idea that yoga is 5,000 years old. It's not in the way that we practice it. There's nothing really about the way that we do it on a daily basis here in the West that was being done 5,000 years ago. What we have in the West today is a very modernized practice that suits our own Western needs. But pieces that are 5,000 years old include the meditation, the mantra, and the ritual. So people for sure have been doing that for thousands of years. And so I felt like bringing forth the mantra and giving people better access to it and better understanding and bringing it to life and making it more practical was a really important piece of work for me to do. And of course, I loved myths. That was really the first thing that made me fall in love with the practice, or the mythology. So any chance to write about that and then cover some of the myths behind the practices that we do and bring them to life and give people a greater context, a greater way to feel and experience the work that we do, I think is a really powerful way to get people to love their yoga practice more.
Here in San Diego, last week we did a kirtan at another local yoga studio, and they had a big picture of Ganesha, the elephant-headed god, which people going to a yoga studio are probably going to encounter that. How, using your depth psychology and the study you've done, how would you explain to a Western person just going to a yoga studio why there's a big picture of an elephant-headed being at the forefront of that studio?
I think there's multiple ways to go around it. The first thing I would say to anybody coming into a studio is that this picture of this elephant-headed being does not have to be here. If it's something that makes you uncomfortable, or if it's something that really doesn't resonate with you, just ignore it and move on. There's a lot of ways to bring your own belief system, your own mythology into practice. So first and foremost, it's not a requirement of a yoga practitioner to fall in love with Hindu mythology per se. But many of us have left our own religious practices or mythology behind, or we've flat out rejected it. We're just not interested in it anymore. Or many of us are fascinated and open-minded about what the myths of Hinduism may have to say about the inner workings of our minds. In that case, I would tell them that Ganesha is often thought of as the remover of obstacles, but that's a little bit inaccurate because, frankly, there is no Ganesh out there. He's not going to show up and fix your problems for you. He's not going to, knock on your door and give you a free pass. I like to think Ganesh as more of the revealer of possibilities, and more specifically, the power within you to reveal your own possibilities, your ability to shift your perspective and see things differently, to understand that the obstacles that are present for you right now are learning opportunities and ways for you to make your way around them. So in a yogic perspective, Ganesh isn't an entity outside of us that we pray to or chant to. From a yogic perspective, Ganesh is an entity or an energy within our own self, that when we say the name of it, we're bringing that part of ourself to life. We're asking that part of ourself to come up and out and be crafty and be resourceful and find a way around whatever is going on with us, so that we know ourselves that we are capable of handling our own stuff. So Ganesh, his image is really there for that, as a visual reminder of the deep power of our own psyche and soul to do what it is we need to do to get past our own problems and transform. Within the family tree, Ganesh is the son of Shiva, and so Shiva is the great transformer, and so Ganesh really believes in that transformation. These stories and these myths actually give us an opportunity to discover more about ourselves. They are external representations of energies and truths that are alive within us. It's often much easier to look outside of ourselves and see the picture or the myth or the story or the image and figure it out on those terms and on that level than it is to try to just dig it up from within ourselves and change our own stuff. I think anybody out there understands that our self-doubt is powerful. And when we're in a place of a problem, like we often find ourselves when we're chanting to Ganesh, we don't believe ourselves to be powerful enough to fix that problem, so we ask for outside help. Well, the trick is that help isn't outside, it's inside. So as we chant and as we look at the image and the shape and as we learn about the myth and how Ganesh reveals our obstacles, or rather reveals our possibilities rather than just blasts away our obstacles, we learn more about ourselves and we learn what we're truly capable of.
Wow, that's a great explanation. Yeah, I think...
thanks.
Yeah, very nice. And so a lot of, over the past couple of years, we've graduated about 150 yoga teachers. And so
congratulations.
Yeah. And it's so wonderful seeing people make the we talk about transformation, the transformation from once a week yoga at a yoga studio to immersing yourself in yoga for 5 months and then going and offering
Big
that.
Deal.
Yeah, and seeing people come back and they tell me, oh, I'm teaching at a prison or I'm teaching for children and these different things. And so I'm wondering
That's awesome.
what advice you would give to teachers, to yoga teachers, to help them make yoga as accessible as possible. Because there's so many different groups of people that are interested in yoga now. Yoga's become so ubiquitous. How can teachers make it really accessible, no matter if they're dealing with the local church or children or that wide array? How to make it accessible?
Well, I over the years I've sort of jokingly come up with 3 rules for spirituality, just to keep it real, honestly. The first rule I joke is don't get weird. Don't get weird. Like, I see a lot of people go through their transformation into becoming a yoga teacher, and they believe that in order to become a yoga teacher, they must sort of take on all of the things they think a yoga teacher is supposed to have, like stretchy pants and a bindi and patchouli perfume and a raw food diet. They transform into what they believe a yoga teacher should be, and I counsel against that with the don't get weird, because you need to stay who you are. Mm-hmm. Allow yoga to reinforce who you are as a person. So I think my piece of advice to these new teachers would be, look, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget who you are. Before you started this training, you were an American with a Western psychology who probably enjoyed, drinking this or that, or eating this or that, or going out on a Friday night, who had a good time with this particular activity. Don't give that up. Bring your yoga to all that. That's going to make you accessible. If you walk into a prison or a school as this lofty, otherworldly yoga person that people can't really connect with, there's nothing accessible in that. So stay grounded in your roots and allow the yoga to show up with you as you go to these places. Just be yourself, and that's going to speak more powerfully to these people and allow you to connect with them more deeply than if you're trying to bring them this sort of falsified kind of yoga person that honestly doesn't really exist. And it's a much tighter, more confined box than if you were to just be yourself and allow the yoga to do its job through you.
I think that's great advice.
Thanks. Yeah, I hope so.
yeah, it's very good. Staying real and letting the yoga transform you, I think, from the inside, and see how it blossoms rather than thinking, okay, I'm a yogi because of these external elements.
Yeah, and, bringing the yoga to every situation, you can still participate in all of the things that you enjoy. You can stay, you can go to your family functions and deal with those challenging family members now because you're a yogi. You don't try to avoid them or reject or push away any part of your life just because some construct says that you shouldn't because you're that doesn't happen. There's no part of the Yoga Sutra or any of the yoga teachings that says you have to give up all of these things you enjoy.
Right.
There's nothing that says that, So
now I notice my last question is, I notice in your where you talk about your different principles that you're, like, the Kaivalya yoga is based upon. You quote the Yoga Sutras often, and I like to ask people, different teachers, of how you explain brahmacharya to students or people who are reading the yoga, because I know different paths and different traditions. Some people adopt a life of celibacy. Some people, take it different ways. So how do you relate to and teach the principle of brahmacharya?
Well, that's a bold question, my friend.
Yeah, well, keep our listeners interested.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, I honestly, I would go back to just a little bit of a historical reference that the Yoga Sutra were written about 2,000 years ago or so. We don't have an exact date on it. But at that time, and really honestly, up until about 100 years ago, the only people practicing yoga were Indian men of the priesthood. Okay, so this wasn't a universal practice until we brought it to the West and made it so. What we're doing now is a real revolution and a real shift. in yoga's makeup. And yes, I'm aware that there were a few female practitioners in the more Tantra past within the Middle Ages, but they would have been more few and far between. Primarily, throughout history, yoga has been the province of the priestly caste of Brahmin men in India. And as such, of course, if you look at almost any member of a clergy in any religion, one of their precepts is celibacy. And that is, the reason for that is to focus on God, to focus on their spiritual practice. And that's completely appropriate in that context. Well, I don't honestly know at this time here in America of any of my colleagues who are men, who are Indian, who are of the priestly caste, who have taken vows of celibacy. So that teaching was from 2,000 years ago. It's not necessarily relevant today. Most of us who practice, frankly, in America, we're women. 80% of the practitioners of America are female. So that's new. And almost all of us are householders, which is also very new. So, I think that we have this false impression that just because the book was written 2,000 years ago, no new information can be added. Well, 2,000 years ago, we were not in the conditions that we are now practicing yoga. This is an entirely different time, an entirely different place, and an entirely different context. So to try and enforce or teach celibacy to today's group of yoga practitioners is really impractical, and isn't appropriate given where and who we're teaching it to today. I think the best application we can provide with brahmacharya in today's context is simply the responsible and wise use of our interactions with others to make sure that every time we do engage in sexual intercourse with another human being, that it is something that facilitates our yoga practice, brings us closer to them, gives us a physical experience of actual union, as opposed to it being a divisive experience. Because I'm sure as anybody who's had sex as an adult in 2015 and these days knows it can be divisive. It can be something that really sets you apart from the other person. That doesn't make you feel better in the morning. That doesn't make you feel closer to them in the morning. So, if you just keep the actual attitude of yoga, which is union, in mind as you do it, I think that's probably the best we can do with it these days. Until yoga turns around and becomes a more priestly endeavor, we'll simply do our best with that directive and realize that we're living in a different time and a different context.
I think that's a really good perspective, and especially the idea that the sexual energy is a powerful energy, but you have to bring in the yogic principles, non-violence, non-harming, awareness, and for that real transformation.
Really, absolutely. I mean, why not? You should bring those principles into everything you do,
Right. Yeah, good point. Well, Ilana, I really appreciate you talking to us. I think it's great that you're out there sharing yoga and spreading yoga and probably touching so many lives. It must be very satisfying.
Oh, yeah, it's great. Thank you. And I get the opportunity to speak to people like you, so thanks for having me on the podcast. You're
very welcome. And if you ever make it out to San Diego, I'd love to invite you to see our studio and treat you to a meal at our vegetarian restaurant. So some friends and I opened a
fantastic
vegetarian restaurant back in '86. And so in a little nice neighborhood of Normal Heights, there's a little nice neighborhood of San Diego called Normal Heights. There's a nice yoga studio and vegetarian restaurant. So, well, thank you very much, Ilana, and we've really appreciated having you. Anyone who wants to learn more about Ilana Kaivalya and her wonderful teachings can go to www.alannak.com. That's ALANNAK.com. So, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. This has been a production of Pilgrimage of the Heart Yoga. Join us at our studios here in San Diego or visit us online at pyo.yoga. Namaste.